over here, we have our 16 pads into which, as I mentioned before, you can add your drums or your instruments. I personally like to use these to sequence my drums and chop my samples. Everything will be divided into groups. So you can have on group A, for instance, you can have your sample. Group B, you can have your instruments, and so on and so forth. Next, over the pads over here, we have the fixed velocity button. That simply means that if you want all your pads to sound at the same level, you just press the fixed vel button. Pad modes, basically you can divide all your pads into groups and basically have them choke each other off. So for instance, if I want my pad 1 to stop playing soon as I press the pad 2, like so, as you can see, pad 1 is still playing although I press pad 2. So in order for you to avoid that, you're gonna have to go on the pad mode, like I said, and the first knob over here, you have choke and group. So what I'm gonna do basically is select the pad 1, and it's gonna be on group 1, pad 2, group 1. And now when I play, they're choking each other off. With the pad mode, as you can see on the right screen over here, you also have the octaves. So basically, if you want to change the notes of your pads, you can do so by selecting the pads and then just pressing one of those stop buttons here. So if you wanted to go lower in octave, just press this one. And if you wanted to go higher, so when I press the lower, as you can see, I'm one octave less. If I want to go back, you also can do that in semitones if you want. Next, we have our keyboard. So for instance, I have my samples here. As you can see, the pad 1 sample is now spread onto those 16 pads in different notes. So for instance, and so on and so forth. Chords. Chords is, for example, if I go into my instruments, and over here, I think I do have a piano. So if I go into the chords, I'm able to play just one note and have it translated as a chord. So for example, here we have the scale. You can choose the scale. You can choose the type of scale. So chromatic, major, minor, harmonic minor, etc., etc., and the modes. So if you want it as a harmonizer or chord set, and then the type again, major, minor, etc., etc. So for example, I have a note here. If I go back to my chords, I have a chord. Next, we have the step sequencer. So the step sequencer is pretty much your piano roll. So if you're playing some notes and you're recording into your machine software, those notes will appear here, and you will be able to fix, to change the velocity or the pitch or even the position of those notes. Over here, you have scene, patterns, events, variation, etc., etc. Those are pretty much for you to control the structure of your song. I'm not going to go over it right now, but as we go along, you will learn a little bit more about these options here. Now, the really important point that I wanted to touch on is the shift button, which basically allows you to go over different options on the machine hardware. So for instance, you have all these like 16 pads here, and they're numerated, but they also have some writings right next to it. So for example, pad 1 is undo, 2 is redo, etc., etc. So those are options that will allow you, for example, undo is very simple. If you are doing something on your hardware that you're not liking and you would like to go back to the previous action, all you got to do is press shift and press undo. Very important thing I want to touch on is the shift and mute. So for example, when I play a sample, I press stop and it doesn't stop. What I have to do is press shift and mute. So that will activate the actual shift and choke, which will stop the sample from playing by itself. So over here we have the play, which will play your record. And here we can stop it. You have the restart. You have the erase, the tap, which is basically your metronome. You can press metro over here. Follow, which gives you an overview of your grid. Stop and record. If you press shift and record, you're going to have a count in before it records. So for example, okay, last thing that I would like to touch on in this lesson is our plugin instance. So anytime I'm trying to produce or live perform in Maschine, I will make sure that this is lit on. Not this one, this one. This will allow me to have access to all the main windows for my production or live performance. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you guys how to add instruments onto your groups and pads, as well as how to add a third-party plugin or VST into your Maschine software.